Alright guys, this is actually going to be a claymation video. For once, we'll continue the coil series for Insight Teaching Masterclass over time again. We have the other half of it to finish, but for now we'll talk about claymation as its own masterclass as kind of stuff. But we're just going to do a bit of a topic discussion slash teaching of claymation. We're going to talk about what some things that make it both easier and harder to do in claymation compared to CGI. So that includes 2D and 3D for the most part, compared to stop motion animation. Right off the bat, there is one particular thing that they don't have to do with that anyone entering claymation, both novice or veteran, doesn't have to care about when they do claymation, and that is the rigging. When you're in CGI with 2D and 3D particularly again, you do this sort of a rigging process for the character models, and then you have to think about how to make the model function for it to even remotely be good in an animation. No emotional hard tendencies included usually, maybe, but and the thing with the rig is that in CGI, if you're working with the rig to be animated then soon after, even when it works the first time, it might break over time. And so while you're animating, you're still trying to maintain the rig. And if it isn't working properly, you go back to making the rig work in the computer program, and then go back to animation. In claymation, there are several things that make this easier for claymation in the idea of rigs. I won't dismiss the idea of character rigs and models being a thing in stop motion, but for starters, you don't need to actually do a rigging process in claymation. That whole step is skipped with stop motion animation. You don't have to have a rig because you're not only working with a physical model right in front of you in the real earthly world. I don't need to be that dense about it, but so that you can visibly see in front of you. You're working with a real model in front of you that you can maintain in other completely different environments and mediums, which is including claymation. But let's assume that your claymation model does break down over time while you're animating. The minor tweaks you can fix in the middle of the animation process. So while simultaneously animating, you can also fix the minor tweaks of the claymation prop. And when they're major even, you can still fix those very quickly in a way that does not have to ruin the whole rig by every other tweak you would have otherwise done, maybe in a computer program for CGI's 2D and 3D. Because sometimes in the bug fixes in a computer program, you can break other things with the other things. This is a completely different medium for claymation, so as far as I understand it, if you fix one part of the physical model, it doesn't have to break everything at the same time, unless you're really maybe down bad in that, but not trying to be biased about that, really, but not trying to be. So character rigging is almost a entirely skipped step in claymation. And even when you do work with certain bug fixes in the physical realm, the minor ones are dealt with right as you're animating in the same time, and the major ones can be dealt with a bit sooner anyways to get back into animation processes. That's one thing that makes claymation easier to do than 3D and 2D. One thing that makes it harder to do in 3D and 2D, however, and either way they can be seen as a positive or negative for any of these things, pros and cons, or strengths and weaknesses, you name it. You have to maintain your actual props in a completely different manner as this medium suggests. Because your models are, again, real, you have to maintain an environment that does not break them physically. In a computer program, they can be saved in the cloud. You can put this in a Google Drive thing or whatever, whatever fits the gigabyte storage or even megabytes if that's how big they are. I'm sorry if I don't know that well about 2D, 3D, so I should keep my mouth shut. but as per my understanding of this, you can save that program somewhere safe, and it will only be maintained by the integrity of wherever it's being held. In claymation, that physical prop has to be held safe in the real world. That object has to be, those clay props have to be held safe in whatever container or place they're standing or sitting, and not be damaged as much by the real world in real time as far as anything touching that clay model or even temperature controlling it and other things like the air around it, whatever else. However, seriously good about this kind of stuff. And dust and particles and all the other crap. That's maintained in the other medium. But those two strengths and weaknesses alike with claymation and CGI, that's at least the character models. What about the literal animation process itself? Either way. One thing that makes claymation easier to do than CGI in animation processes alone is you can stop at any time. You can stop filming at anytime. You're working with nanoseconds of frames. So no matter where you're at in the animation, you can just stop right there. And even if it's hanging on a suspension rig wire, or it has a weird ambient thing that you couldn't possibly remember the storyboard of, even if you nodded it to the T, you can make arrangements for that to be improvisational and creative anyways, even if it's not fair. In CGI, in 2D and 3D, if you stop in the middle of the program, just because you have that nanosecond vector or pixel, whatever these computers talk about, in the middle of CGI, you have to stop where it allows you to. Because in CGI, if a program does not fixate itself in the place that you stopped at, it'll estimate where it close to. I may be talking shit at this point, but like, if I remember correctly, in CGI, if it doesn't want to stop where you want it to, then it'll estimate where it should stop instead, and then if it doesn't do that, it'll break entirely. And there's enough that goes into this that doesn't make it too hard otherwise. But I think CGI was very pinpoint accurate about how you can save an animation and continue later. But I don't want to say too much about that without knowing that from my own experience as just a stop motion animator. But it's like but that is one of the harder ways that it comes about. You can't necessarily stop in CGI at any point you want. And in claymation, because you're working with frames in frames per seconds and stop motion pictures of taking snapshots, you can stop at any literal moment. And that is very important. Now, even by nanoseconds, that's very valuable. You don't want to have to stop, again, at the point of a suspension rigging wire line, hanging on a certain angle and then dropping that all completely on claymation. But then again, in CGI, you might have the advantage of, again, saving on the cloud as soon as you're ready with the program. Literal static. But, yeah. One thing that makes animation processes harder in claymation than it would in CGI, 2D, and 3D, as you may expect of this video, is that the visual matters to the extent that you need to have claymation look like what you're trying to resemble. One of my hardest times, and I'll only mention this about props for a second for now, but one of the hardest parts about claymation for me, personally, which could be a bonus for this, is how to make the props polished enough to look like they're actual props. Because I'm very messy and rubby with my props. I don't polish them as much as I should to make them look nicer or even legible. But the niceness of the visual of the prop makes it believable for its own model. But the animation process has to look like actual animation. You'll notice that when you enter claymation into an editor or into a stop motion editor officially, that the least you could do is make it look like animation. And so you have to work the 30 minutes or less, which is how quick I am usually, without even the experience I could have had. And even if I say I'm the experience, I literally have experience, but this is what I mean, is that it doesn't take a lot to do that, in my opinion. But you work it out to at least be an animation, and if it looks like an animation, whether it's the frame rate's right, the speed or whatever, and if you have certain frames to edit out, and then make the visuals look nice for the model and the animation, then you're good. With CGI, the reason that's easier for them than us, I'm not trying to pick sides with this, is that in 2D and 3D, if you want the visuals to look nice, there are certain shortcuts you can take to make it look cleaner. And there are certain things you can do, and I'm not saying this to crap on anybody who's done animation at all, but there are certain kinds of, I dare say, AI ways to do this. Then now it's probably evolving in this 2023 age, but there are certain auto-generated and even AI materials that you can work with. When you want a character to move in a certain direction and it's very predictable how to do it, you can program that automatically. In CGI, in claymation, you could do something similar with the visuals and the audio, but it takes its own practice. And I think it's like, I'm not trying to be biased with even that, but you work with this in CGI in the sense that if something has to look good visually, there's enough material on 3D and 2D to work with in this real world and internet that you can look up otherwise, even if you don't know how to do it yourself. With whatever experience you can work with or materials and research you can do, there's enough to find that you can tell when something in CGI does not look like it should or not. In claymation, you're working at the mercy of the low abundance in claymation material to look up, in the low amount of understanding of what you're even animating yourself, because you're working with something that's truly creative and off scratch. Because your own creativity claymation is not easily understood in the real world. Even after almost 100 years of claymation material existing in the world, it's still an underrated resource. It's an underrated medium to begin with. Like claymation stop motion, we all know this. Even compared to actual CGI in 2D and 3D. 2D and 3D is underrated too, but for another video. But like So to make something, basically to make something look visually nice, in claymation, you're at the mercy of what you know from what you understood from the experience and learning, and you have to make it look good on your own terms. In 3D and 2D, you at least have help from people who have done it before, and you also can tell in 2D and 3D if it doesn't look like what it's supposed to. You'll know. You look at 2D and 3D, like flat and three-dimensional figures in programs and computers. You'll know. I'm not trying to sound vague with this, but just that's the idea. So that should be just about it for now. But yeah, the thing with claymation, 2D and 3D, those three alone, stop motion and 2D and 3D, they're all just mediums. You have to do different things with mediums all the time to begin with, even if they're all similar in some other ways, unique and relatable. But you want to be someone who can take in, if you're a novice 2D or 3D animator, or a novice stop motion animator, or a veteran, either one of those three. Don't be hard on yourself if something is easier or harder in that medium. If you can't do it the way you're expected to, don't worry about that. Just form a pattern and a lifestyle around the things that make it easier or worse for you. I mean, easier or harder for you. Different things you can work with. Because look at me. I don't know how I started. I looked like I was good at claymation as soon as I started. That's probably because I took it for granted. I didn't have to know that I was a good claymation animator when I started. And I didn't have to know that I had a project skill in it that got better over time nonetheless, even if it wasn't higher or low as I thought it was. But the confidence in that can vary. The competence in that can vary. But even including 2D and 3D for that matter, you don't want to be hard on yourself just because you did it in a better or worse way. There's a way to be hard on yourself for doing too well. That's what I'm saying here. Is that there's a way to be too hard on yourself, whether it's better or worse, or even too easy on yourself when it's that's worse than it doesn't need to be. But claymation is hard or easy based on how you manage the character rigs, as per example, or how to make it visually look neat, how to make it easy to stop filming, and then how to make it something that you can actually save safely in a physical environment compared to a digital one. Those are the four pros and cons of either character design and filming and animation that these can be for between claymation and computer generated images. Yeah. Hope this video didn't annoy you too much. I know I'm still working on the Coil series for the Insight course for free. That's going to still continue. I'm going to release the second half of that over time. There's going to be like 3 more videos for that. A 7x1x4 set of videos for that. But we'll make more claymation videos over time as well. For this end card, if I even add one in, I'll just say click on these 2 videos for new and relatable content, and one should be my subscribe, and the last one should be a claymation playlist. So take care, guys. More claymation discussions and tutorials to come as well for free, of course, for now.